That's exactly the landscape of my childhood. And it's much starker than people think of. They think of the palm trees as these glossy, beautiful things, but I always saw them as this marker so that we could make it home on our bikes. And you went down this row of palm trees, and it wasn't even like a tunnel. There's no way of describing it. I remember when I was little and the wind would blow really, really hard, like 80 miles an hour. You would look up at those palm trees and they all looked like toothbrushes because they were all facing this way, and they would be swaying toothbrushes, and it was really amazing. But it's much starker, and it felt to me like the black and white captured what I remembered more. The boulders were white, the palm trees were brown and black, and then there were flashes of silver when the moon came out at night. And suddenly I remembered when I saw the Weld County, Colorado photograph of that abandoned farmstead. I remembered being there exactly, and that's where my brothers and my father was born. I have written only 2 essays about my brother in these past 10 years, and I've never read one out loud. So I hesitated, and it took me at least 2 weeks to decide that I would write about this. When I was 22 and my brother was 19, we took a cross-country journey from Amherst, Massachusetts to Riverside, California. But the part that I remember is the part in Colorado. We headed to Colorado to our father's people. And you have to imagine us, both with blonde hair down to the center of our spines, so alike from the back that one day our Swiss grandmother grumbled in disgust that she couldn't tell who was washing and who was drying the dishes. My tiny silver Honda, either my brother blowing marijuana smoke out the open window and me driving, scared cops were going to see us, or him driving 90 and me just trying to listen to the soundtrack he'd picked for us. Bon Jovi, I walk these streets, a loaded 6-string on my back, I play for keeps because I might not make it back. I'm a cowboy on a steel horse I ride, and I'm wanted dead or alive. He sang that really loud. Yeah, you can make fun of us. It was a rougher version of Dazed and Confused, although of course we didn't know that at the time. But driving through the corn and then the wheat and the silos and suddenly coming out into the immense flatness of the land was like nothing we'd ever done. We'd been camping with our family, and I had already driven everywhere with my boyfriend. And my brother did a lot of delivering of his crop around Southern California. But I had never, and I mean never, been away from any responsibility or schedule. And my brother had never subscribed to either of those ideas. He had never paid taxes, never appeared on any government radar, and I don't even think he had a driver's license then. He had begun to use our father's last name because of some trouble with the law, even though he'd been adopted by our stepdad. We came closer to Colorado, and a grandfather I hadn't seen since I was 1, and he conned my mother out of her last $500 in California and then skipped back to the Rockies. He didn't even know about my brother. My father would never tell me stories of Colorado. When I asked, he'd say, "It's none of your damn business." So to finish those genealogy papers in college, I made up fiction about the Rockies and cowboys. But in the truth, which he'd finally begun to tell me recently now that he's 80, that truth was as hard as quartz. Every time I see these Robert Adams photographs, the stories are all there, hidden at the edges of the trees and the road and the creeks. My grandfather was born in 1901 in rural Colorado. He was charismatic, violent, and dishonest. I don't know why. Probably genetics. My grandmother Ruby was of French descent and born with her 9 sisters and 1 brother in Illinois. Her father was one of those hapless kind of men. He burned down the barn smoking, and his wife went out to Weld County, Colorado with her youngest daughter to stay with her older daughters, and she never spoke to her husband again. I'm talking about 30 years. The girls were vivacious and headstrong and hardworking. They lived in the prairie, they taught school, they worked farms, they married. They went to the mountains by driving backwards up the steep inclines to keep gas in the tanks of the Model T Fords. Apparently my grandmother drove backwards for 50 miles one day. One night at a country dance, Robert Strait saw Ruby Triboulet, and he threatened every man in the hall not to go near her. She was confused about why no one asked her to dance for the whole night. He married her, and they had 4 children, and their life was a sad and frightening dance of leaving, staying, hunger, violence, and cold. They had sheep ranches that failed during the Depression. They had a daughter that died at 14 of a blue heart, which could be repaired now. 3 stories my father told me recently. Harvesting Christmas trees in the Rockies, him standing in a shallow river in December for 10 hours, handing the cut pines over to the others who loaded them onto the truck. He had frostbite in his feet, and they've heard him ever since. He rode a white horse when he was 8 years old, miles along a timber line alone to make it down a slope after his father left to load logs. He saw a grizzly bear that had eaten their sheep, caught in a trap, hanging in the trees above him while his father made him look, and then cutting up the bear and eating the fried meat. That day, my brother and I came down through Cheyenne, Wyoming, and then we turned on the rural highway, 85, 2 lanes exactly from the images of Robert Adams all around us now, into Weld County. We pulled into a farmhouse on the edge of none. It was Carl Tribulet's farmhouse. He had died 6 weeks earlier, the only son. We stayed there in the attic bedroom with his wife, Bee. She was a Kansan. They still teased her, even though she was in her 70s. She was born in Juanita, just over the border. They loved my brother, all of them in none. We painted the eaves of the farmhouse, and then my brother painted part of the barn while I spent time in the kitchen, which looked exactly like the one taken by Robert Adams in Pete's, Colorado. Formica table, metal edges, and we sat there while I learned to make fried chicken and pie filling. We visited relatives in all the rural towns, which even now have no more than 300, 500, or 1,000 people. When they asked about my father, I said very little. And when they found out we planned to drive to LaPorte, Colorado, to see our grandfather, their faces changed. They all wanted to tell us something, but instead they just said, "You should leave that alone," or "Maybe it's best if you two just head on home." I think that my favorite parts of America are the places on the edges, the exact places that Robert Adams photographs. I mean, maybe those aren't the most important places, but to me that's truly what we have.